Hi, I'm Monique Samuels, and I'm the founder of Mila Eve Essentials. Mila Eve products are designed with your mind, body, and soul in mind. We are a Black-owned, woman-owned business who specialize in making products that are cruelty-free, pure, and therapeutic. Why try Mila Eve Essentials? Because we eliminate harsh chemicals and only use ingredients with natural elements that provide a variety of wonderful benefits for you and your household. Feel free to give us feedback by hashtagging Mila Eve Essentials on all social media platforms. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, where you can get essential oil recipes, fun product facts, and other important usage information. Nature knows best, and so does Mila Eve.
Hard work every day, not a lazy mom, got no time to play. Always on the go, you stuck on the flow, but it's time for the show.
Hey everybody! Y'all caught me like into my coffee. It's one of those kind of mornings. What's going on, Alex? How's it going over there?
Can I tell you, I woke up this morning and in the 20-degree weather that it was, I went for a 5-mile run. I'm feeling good. Highly suggest, as like a little quick tip, run in the cold. It feels so good.
That is true, because it's like, what I like about it is that when you get hot, you're still like cool.
Yes.
Yes. I hate running in the summertime and then you start sweating and stuff. It's like a different type of, energy. But no, that's a great tip. And it probably like really woke you up and energized you and all that.
Oh yeah, I'm like ready to go. Yep.
Yes. Awesome. All right. Well, look, today's episode, I didn't even ask about you. I'm sorry. Chris over here, y'all just missed it. Chris just got on me before we started recording because I didn't let him speak. I cut him off, which I do all the time. So he should be used to that by now. No. But I'm sorry.
It's all
I
good.
apologize.
It's all good. I'm just thinking about running on the treadmill. I'm not going in that cold weather.
Look, at some point, I'm going to get better about not cutting him off because I do that a lot.
I mean, it's good. I mean, it's cool.
No, it's not cool.
No, it's cool. It's fine.
Okay.
I'm not going to beat you up or anything. You'll be all right.
Here, I just cut Chris off now. Sorry, Chris.
Well, just take me off the podcast. We need to get moving. Let's go.
No, sometimes he takes too long to make his point, and I just be like,
because I'm getting cut off all the time.
Come on. Oh my God. But listen, today I'm always excited about the episodes that we come with because they to me always go outside of the scope of just parenthood. This can apply to whomever. A lot of our episodes can apply to whomever, but we're continuing our generational wealth series. And today we're discussing estate planning 101. So when it comes to generational wealth, most of us want to talk about how to make and keep your money, but we don't want to discuss what will happen with all that we worked for if we were to die, which all of us, we're going to die at some point, hopefully not today, but at some point it's going to happen. It's a tough conversation to have, but it's very necessary. So we're going to talk about estate planning. And I just want people to really understand, do you realize that all of us have an estate? It's not just about wealth or being rich. It's about the fact that you are a person who owns things, whether it is, jewelry or purses or
a car,
anything. You have an estate and you need to protect that if something happens to you or if you're incapacitated to the point where you can't make decisions for yourself. So it's basically just a summation of everything that you own or possess. So because this topic is so broad, it may actually require 2 parts, but we'll see. We're going to break it down to the basics and give you the overall foundation of what it is, what's required. What can you do today to make sure your affairs are carried out properly, not only at death, but if something were to happen to you health-wise? And I'm excited because we have an expert in the field that is coming to talk to us. And I'm going to pop her on the screen right now. We have Martha Sotelo. Hi, Martha.
How are you all?
We're doing good. Much better that you're here because we see Martha personally. She is our estate planner and we see her annually. So it's not even just about having your estate plan, but it's also making sure that you update it, check in, and make sure if things change, you need to see your estate planner. So thank you, Martha, so much for joining us today. I'm really excited about this conversation.
Well, thank you all for having me. I usually tell clients, I totally understand that I may not be what they really want to do that day. Having a conversation with me is not probably what they woke up going, yay, let's go talk about estate planning. But it is so important. And that's really why I'm passionate about it, because I do feel like, hopefully when I'm, spending my time here at work, I'm helping, that there's something more to this than just, plugging my hours in and doing a job. And it's not only, talking about the assets that we have, it's about our loved ones. It's taking care of our spouse, our children, our parents. And so, taking the time just to sit down and think about these things, the good thing, what I think, is that you do it, you get it done, and then you can kind of move on with your life. You want to come back and check in, obviously, because life changes, relationships change, assets change. But once you've done it the first time, my hope is, and you guys can hopefully attest to this, it's not so bad, right? After you get through that first time, then coming back and tweaking it is really not so bad. So what is it, I guess, is your next question. What is estate planning, right?
Before we get into it, and thank you, let me tell y'all are about to get so much knowledge today. Martha is the perfect person for this topic. She has been doing this for a very long time, and she is actually the principal in the law firm Vaughan, Fincher, and Sotelo. And this law firm is dedicated to providing estate planning and estate administration services to families and their businesses in the Washington metropolitan area. So Martha assists clients with their estate planning and estate administration needs, and she's the lead estate administration attorney at her firm, where she handles a variety of complex estate administration issues. She's also a member of the Northern Virginia Estate Planning Council, the Fairfax County Bar Association, and the Virginia Bar Association. So she got credentials.
I am licensed. I am licensed in the state of Virginia, Maryland, and DC. So that's good, right?
How many years of school did all that take?
So, I went straight through. I went undergrad to law school, and I will tell you that I didn't go to law school thinking that, I was going to do estate planning. For all those moms out there who are kind of worried about what their kids are going to do, I went to law school because the job market was bad, and I really didn't know what else to do. And I took the LSATs and was kind of like, okay, let's just see. People had said, why don't you consider this? And really just kind of fell into it, so wow. I've been very, very blessed because even getting into estate planning, one of my partners, her name is Donna Fincher. Donna Fincher was working for an attorney, Pat Vaughan, who established our practice in the 70s. And Donna opened the door for me to come in when I kind of practiced for about 5 years and still hadn't found my niche yet, so as amazingly, my oldest daughter is now 24, and part of the decision to come into this practice, again, was made really more pragmatically. I was thinking about, I wanted to try and have work-life balance, like probably everybody else on this podcast, and felt like this practice would, be suitable to that. And it has been, but it's opened up so many other doors. Like I said, like getting to help families, working through a variety of issues. Every family has their own dynamic, and if it's not an asset issue that's complicated, like a business, then it might be, a relationship issue or a special needs child. Wow. So when we talk about estate planning, I think one of the nuances there is people get kind of frightened or just concerned. What does that mean? Mm-hmm. Basically we're talking about just putting some legal documents into place that will help take care of you if you're living and you can't make decisions for yourself, help take care of your children if you pass away and you have minor children and you need, someone to take care of them or take care of their property. I think kind of the difference with where I think about estate planning being different than, say, just going online and pulling up a will and plugging in, what you think is going to work. Estate planning is more holistic. We're not only just looking at those legal documents, we're kind of diving into the details. We're looking at what you own, how you own it, meaning, do you own assets, say, jointly with someone, or do you own assets that pass by a beneficiary designation? And the reason why we're not just looking at the legal documents, while we're looking at, all the assets and putting that whole big picture together, is because I could draft the most beautiful documents for you. And, in my world, that's beauty, right? Oh, this beautiful trust. Okay. But when the time came to use that document, if your assets don't line up with the plan that we've created, then your wishes aren't going to get fulfilled. So, kind of an example of that is, again, like with joint ownership. If I have 2 daughters, I have a husband, but I also have 2 daughters. Let's say I thought a great strategy would be to just go name my kids jointly on all of my assets. Well, I could have just disinherited my husband. Maybe that's not my intent. Or I could say, I thought I would just name my daughter as a beneficiary on all these assets, and she'll share with her sister, right? No, that's not going to happen. Wow. So when we talk about estate planning, again, it's not just putting legal documents in place. It's really diving down into the details and looking at all your assets. And again, how they are titled is really critical. And so when I say titled, again, what I'm talking about is it joint with right of survivorship? So if you had a bank account that was joint with right of survivorship with someone and you die, that means that account will go automatically to that individual. Your will or your trust is not going to control that asset. Similarly, if you had a beneficiary designation asset, if your asset names someone as a beneficiary, that controls where that account goes. And again, it could result in some surprises.
Martha, wow. First off, I so everything you're saying, I'm like nodding, because actually I unfortunately just had to deal with all of this. And 2.5 years later, my dad's estate is finally done. He unexpectedly passed and he had nothing planned. I mean, there was no estate. It was a cluster. It was a mess. We had to bring, obviously like an estate lawyer involved and everything. But you said a couple of things that have really hit close to home. And for those listening, you're right. It's not about a lot of those tangible items. It's about the people that you leave behind. And because everything was a mess, I will tell you, I'm still 2.5 years later not speaking to his wife and their kids. Like, we are estranged, and it's really sad. But it's because everything got so messy because nothing was organized ahead of time. That being said, I also, something else you said about not to just, I didn't even know, I mean, that makes sense. You can just kind of make your will online and call it a day. After my father passed, my husband and I met with someone to plan our estate, plan every single detail. And I highly encourage those listening to meet with somebody face to face, to guide them through everything, to talk them like, Martha, how you're speaking right now and explaining stuff. It is uncomfortable and it's emotional, and it's not something that you're excited to do for the day. But I will tell you, leaving that meeting, I did feel like a weight was lifted. It was something I didn't have to think about again. As you said, you could make touch-ups here and there, but it's really important to do for your loved ones. It really is.
Yes. I know when Chris and I got married, that was the first thing we did. We were like, okay, let's sit down and plan out everything, because especially when you have so much going on in your time, but also in your assets and everything that's all laid out. I had my own life insurance policy. Chris had his own. Those were things that we had to take into account. Are there family members who I would like to have, something for? Because at the time we didn't have children. He has family. He has a mom and a dad the same way I do. We had to sit down and talk about that. And I will be honest, it wasn't always a pleasant conversation between Chris and I. Yeah. But it was necessary. We knew it was necessary. and we would meet with you, Martha, and you would give us some guidance and tell us like this, that, or the other, and you can work this out this way. You gave us so many different ways to structure that we were able to go home and say, we feel good about this.
Right.
So coming back, once we had Christopher, we had to then restructure again because now we have a child. So, and then when do we give this child all of this money? Do we just like pass away and both of us are gone and he just inherits all of this that he doesn't know how to manage? So we have restrictions as far as what he's able to touch at what age, and it's like distributed accordingly based off of what we think his maturity level would be, but also making sure that he has everything that he needs.
Right.
And Martha, you've definitely been a blessing to us because, you know, I didn't come from a background with a whole lot of wealth. So all of this was foreign to me. It was strange. And it was definitely something that I dreaded doing, but it's so necessary. So God forbid if something happened to me, I want to pass on everything to my wife and kids and make sure that they're fine. So it's a necessary deal that you have to get done. So for everybody out there that hadn't taken this process or been through it yet, just bite the bullet, suck it up, go through it. It's
not that bad.
Right.
It really isn't that bad.
It's not that bad. But you're so relieved, though, after you're done, knowing that they'll be fine and taken care of.
Yeah, and the more I feel like the more assets you have, it's a longer process. And also with the businesses and everything else. And I will say, you got to think about it in terms of your loved ones. Like Ali's, what you're going through. It would really suck for them to lose you, but then to lose you and then have to make all of these financial decisions or be hurt financially in some type of way, because sometimes that money can't be touched right away. Right. And you got to bury this person. You want to make sure that they have a nice homegoing service. If that's what you desire, that stuff costs money.
Funerals are expensive.
They are very expensive. The markup on funerals and everything you need as far as caskets, all of those things, is so ridiculously high, and it's set up that way intentionally because you're mourning. So you're going to say, oh yeah, give me that Mercedes looking casket, give him all the flowers, and you want to have this whole service looking amazing. Calla lilies cost a lot of money. I had to learn the hard way when we lost a friend of ours, and we said that we were going to cover the funeral. We didn't know what we were getting ourselves into. Yeah. So it's a lot of money.
Yeah. I mean, I would, for your average funeral, just since we're on that topic, you know, what I see is you're looking probably about 20,000, you know, just for I grew up in the South. So kind of your traditional funeral, though I'm not really seeing that level of service anymore. I mean, you know, you used to have the visitation and the funeral and, you know, maybe a reception after, you know, a lot of families are doing different things, even pre-COVID, but
no, we turned up after funerals. We turned up. It has to be an open bar, and everybody has a good old time, and people leave pretty much like they just left the club because we were in our mind.
Yeah, so that you're way over the top of my estimate there. So. The open bar just killed that estimate.
Exactly. It's like you want to feel like, we always say it's a homegoing celebration. It's like we have to mentally trick ourselves and try to like look past the fact that we lost someone close to us and try to find some way to smile about it. And you know, people want to pour some out for the homies. They're wasting alcohol. The alcohol costs money, and they're wasting it. And it's like they're thinking like, oh, this is going to make me feel better about the loss, you know, until the hangover happens. But it's true. It goes on.
Can I just
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, Monique, seriously, like, because there was no estate when my dad passed and it was just on me to pay for the funeral, I was like, you guys, it's bring your own sandwiches. Like, we're just gonna, like, I am sorry. There is no booze. There is nothing. We're gonna stand here, pay our respects. Like, please. It was just so expensive. And you're also, you know, going back to everything you're saying about planning the estate and leaving your loved ones, when you go, whether it's expected or unexpected, they're not in the right headspace. Like they are grieving. They are going through this process of what is happening. So to not be organized for them is just, it's just not okay. It's
Well, it prolongs
yeah.
the grieving process. I mean, that the one thing I really think, with the estate planning is if you do the planning and then again, you've got the assets aligned and you leave behind, you don't have to leave a detailed roadmap, but leave some breadcrumbs, right? At least kind of like, here are the assets that I owned. That it just helps the family through that process. From my perspective too, just on one point there, is that when we get the call that the death has occurred, one of my kind of rules is I really don't want to see you for about 30 days. Because if you come in to see me too quickly, you're not going to hear a word I say. You're going to be in an emotional space. It's just not, it's like, I'm going to be like, the old, Charlie, the teacher on the Charlie Brown cartoons, blah, 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 and you're going to be like, whatever. So, thinking about, okay, get through that first 30 days and then you start, working with the lawyer. And if you get that lawyer the information that they need up front, that's going to be able to allow them to give you much better advice. And it's kind of like, what we're doing in those meetings is we're sitting down and we are looking at everything in your financial life. And then we're going to strategize, well, what are the next steps? What do we have to do to get control over this asset? And so, that goes back to where I was talking about earlier, classification of how your assets are titled. Is it joint? Is it in your sole name? If it's only in your name, that's where we get into the court process that we call probate. Every state has its own version of probate. So, that's something, I don't know, who all is listening and where you're living, but if I live in Virginia, I practice in Virginia, Maryland, and DC. I can tell you about their probate process, but I don't know about what other states have, but I know they have one. And the basic concept is if that asset was only owned by you and you're not here, then legally we have kind of what I call a power vacuum. There's no, if you're not here, there's no one who can, write a check on that account. There's no one that can sign a sales contract on the house. We have to go to court and get someone appointed who then has the legal authority who can take all those transactions on their shoulders. In Virginia, we usually call that an executor. Maryland, you'll call it a personal representative. It's all semantics. It's the same job. It's just, kind of got a different title. But the difference is when we're talking about probate, is the court is always going to be involved in that process. Again, it may look different state to state. Virginia actually has kind of one of the more what I consider onerous probate processes compared to Virginia, Maryland, DC. But in any event, that court is going to be a party to the settlement of your estate. So what we like to do if we're really working with clients on the estate planning process is say, hey, you know what, we think we can do this more efficiently and more streamlined and not have to go through the court process. And we do that using a trust. And so that's, one of the estate planning concepts is, well, how do we get assets to where we want them to go at death? And we just use a different legal tool. Instead of a traditional will, we use a legal document that's called a trust. And so that's, if you're going in and talking to people about your estate planning, that's something you want to ask, does a trust make sense in my situation? A lot of times it does. It's usually what I'm looking at when I'm advising a trust is, complexity of assets. What, not only the dollar amount that you own, but like, how many accounts do you have? How many businesses do you have? How many kids do you have? Because then the family dynamics come into place. And a lot of times if it's more complex than, having one kid and not having anybody to have anything to fight over, a trust is going to be a good alternative or a good part of the estate plan. It doesn't, it basically is what we usually call a will substitute. So again, we're using that trust to do the same job that a traditional will does, but we're using it because it allows us to not be under the supervision of the court to get all those things done.
before you go on, I want to ask you. So, for the average person who works the 9 to 5 every day, they may not have a business, and they're fine with that. Maybe there's just a few things that they own. Maybe they have kids. Maybe they don't. What would you suggest they do for that type of situation? What would be the first step?
Well, so here's one piece. I mean, the question is, do they really care what happens at death, right? I mean, I know we're talking about this, but if you came in and said, the only thing I'm worried about is there anybody here to take care of me, right? If I'm disabled, then, when I start the estate planning discussion, I do point out that a power of attorney and a medical directive, I think anybody, once you reach age 18, so for all those moms out there who have kids who are starting college or in college, early 20-somethings, talking to your kid about getting a power of attorney and a medical directive in place, I think makes a lot of sense. But again, if I'm selfish and I don't care about, what happens to anybody else, I should at least have a power of attorney to govern financial decision making and a medical directive so that someone can make medical decisions for me. That's what I think. Then we move to, okay, well, what happens at death? Do you care? Okay, I care. Well, for kind of basic, simple planning, at least get a will in place, because a will allows you to say who the person is that's going to be in control. If you don't have a will, it's going to be state law, again, which is going to vary by state. And in second marriage situations and so forth, it could be kind of a race to the courthouse. Who's going to get there first to be in charge? And again, I can't advocate that for any family, right? So at least if you say, I don't want to do anything fancy, I just want a will, what does the will accomplish? It lets us put your person in place, your choice gets to be in charge. It allows us to maybe avoid, some, like Virginia has some rules that, we can kind of waive out of that makes things simpler. But when we start looking at, is there more that could be helpful? The criteria on that is like, again, do you have minor children? If you have minor children and you want to do planning for them so that the assets are managed, so that they don't just wake up at age 18 and inherit everything that you own, then a trust is a useful tool for that. If you have a special needs child, that's a whole nother layer of planning for, assets so that child can be taken care of when you're no longer here. So that really kind of makes you think about a trust. Sorry.
I just wanted you to elaborate so that people understand why it's important to have a trust if you have minors or a special needs child in particular. Explain to the people how that will protect the child from having all of their money spent foolishly by whoever is the caretaker. I want you to elaborate on that because that's really important.
So I should probably make clear that I am kind of using trust in different context. Okay. So when we look at planning for children, we want to have my recommendation is that you put assets basically aside so that they don't get immediate access to those assets, and that you have someone who's basically like serving as in a parent role, if you will. You're not here, so somebody's managing that money. So they go to that person, we'll call them a trustee, who then will say, okay, this is what we can spend, we can take care of your tuition, we can take care of your medical bills, we can basically take care of you just like your mom and dad would. And then we can say, okay, well, at certain ages, though, we're going to think you're old enough that you could have this money. And as parents, the parents are going to decide based on their values and their perspective, what the ages are that the child could actually then receive those assets. So like age 30, you could say, okay, age 30, this trust is done, and child, you get everything. Allie, I'm sorry, was there something you wanted to say? Did I you, Allie?
Oh no, you didn't. I was waiting for you to be done, but I just moved my arm. You can always adjust the trust, just like you can always adjust a will, right? Because
right.
I do have friends that have a trust. They're now parents, and they're like, "Gosh, I really wish my parents would adjust it and start us to have some at this point." So it's always, nothing is ever set in stone, right? With everything.
Right. As long as you have capacity, you're drafting those documents, you can amend or change anything, as long as you're here and have capacity. One of the things I was trying to be maybe a little bit clearer on is that when I'm talking about avoiding probate, taking a step back to what I was speaking of a few minutes ago, that's when we're talking about a revocable living trust. So that's the trust that serves as an alternative to a traditional will. The concept of holding assets in trust for a child, that language could be used either in a traditional will or in a trust. So you could have the same language in a will that says, okay, if I die, executor, distribute my assets to a trust for my child. Mm-hmm. That's a strategy that a lot of attorneys use. It's not one I recommend, because here in Virginia, that trust, because it's created as a part of a will, is always going to be under court supervision. The court's going to always have its fingers in that pot. If I create a trust for children using the revocable living trust, then that stays private. It stays out of court control. But again, the language, if you looked in either one of those documents, it's going to look almost identical. It's going to say, here's a trustee, your job is to manage this money for this child. You could make distributions for the child, to take care of them. And then trustee, when the child, reaches those benchmarks, here's the money, and you can turn it over to the child.
Right. So basically, in using just Chris and I as an example, if something were to happen to the both of us, we have 3 kids and a parent that need to be taken care of. And I want to make sure that if I designate someone as the power of attorney or the legal guardian or trustee or of my kids, I want to make sure that they're not running around here buying up different cars and Gucci and purses and talk about, oh yeah, they need this. So basically having a way to make sure that the money's being spent properly and that my kids ain't walking around here looking crazy, while I'm over here living the high life.
And you bring up a really important point, Monique, because there's, again, talking about the different roles, so the trustee can manage the money. You could have a different person, a different individual be the guardian of the child, meaning that they're the ones where the child lives and they're handling, the day-to-day life of the child, but the money's controlled by someone else, so that there's checks and balances.
They have companies that do that.
Yeah, I was about to say, the way ours is set up, we actually have our advising company that manages our investment portfolio. Mm-hmm. They are the company listed that will control the money. So whoever, God forbid, if something happens to me and Chris, whoever is the guardian of our kids, they're not touching that bread. They got to go to the bank and they got to show and prove that they're using this money for this reason. And then if me and Chris just decide to give them a little extra spending money and have that to the side for that guardian, just as a thank you for watching over our kids, we got the houses covered. The mortgages are probably more likely paid off, no car notes. So here's for, electricity and all of that and food and whatever our kid needs is what they would be able to spend.
Right.
Awesome.
So, the one thing, when couples divorce, a lot of times a spouse, let's say the mother of the child, wants to come in and say, I don't want the father of the child to be the guardian. And that's a hard discussion. Just thinking that through is, your natural rights as a parent aren't going to be terminated unless a court terminates them. So even if you're the spouse that has, the full custody of the child while you're living and you pass away, that other parent is going to step in and become and is now is the parent who has custody, right? So just that, as you were talking about guardianship, that was just another thing I kind of wanted to point out, is because a lot of times people who are, when there's a divorce situation and one parent has, physical custody. They do need to think about, well, what would happen if I died? And if there was some reason that they wanted to document that they didn't think that parent should, the surviving parent should be allowed to have custody. I'm not saying that it would work, but they would want to make sure that they document that so that whoever, their family member, whoever's concerned, can let a judge know that maybe, there's a concern there, and the judge would take that into consideration. Let's say if grandma wanted a child and was trying to get custody, they're going to have a hard battle because that parent has got the presumption there. So anyway, that was just something that's come up recently that when we were talking about guardianship, I thought I would just, throw out there because, a lot of people, are in blended families and are not, having, split custody and so forth. So.
Yeah, since you brought up the point about just guardianship and marriage and divorce and all of those different things, can we talk about how, the laws, like you said, they vary in different states. But when it comes to being married and then you losing your spouse and you do not have your last will and testament or there's no estate planning work that was ever pre-done.
Right.
How can a spouse protect themselves from assuming that all assets automatically get transferred to them?
Right. So that's where, going back to knowing what you have, knowing what your assets are, how they are titled, or for the spouse, knowing what their spouse has and how those assets are titled, because it's not an automatic, right to a spouse. Every state, again, has different laws, and a lot of those laws were drafted at times with very different presumptions of what a spouse should have. When you kind of go back to, I think, 100 years ago, it was more focused on the children. It was only, I think, in the 1950s or so that spouses even started having greater rights. Mm-hmm. So, just if you kind of look at the three jurisdictions here in Virginia, if my husband died and he didn't have a will, this is our only marriage, and our children are born of our marriage. I get everything. But if he had a prior marriage and had kids from a prior marriage, then Virginia says I have to split those assets with the children from the prior marriage. DC and Maryland have totally different rules. They don't even say it has to be a prior marriage. If I lived in Maryland and my husband died without a will, I would be splitting assets with my children. So again, how do we get into that category of asset though? That means that's assets that are held in sole name alone. That's what the court's going to govern. If my husband had set up an account, joint with my daughter, and I didn't know about it, I might have some rights to claim that. That's where you really need to get into, to see an attorney to understand there are protections that are given for spouses. But in Virginia, you have to be proactive to make sure you're right, that you know what your rights are and that you exercise them. Did I answer that? Is that?
Oh yeah.
Okay. And honestly, just to add on that from my experience, my stepmother, she, it was obvious, my dad's second marriage. He didn't have her listed anywhere for anything. She didn't get anything. He left everything to my sister and I. And granted, even though we're not speaking, it's still, it's really hard because she was used to a certain lifestyle. She wasn't working. So imagine what that can do to someone who then was relying on their husband for so long and then was left with nothing.
Yeah.
So you're right. It's just another reason to plan.
Wow. Retirement accounts and life insurance are another two assets we should talk about that. Yeah. Because they typically pass by beneficiary designation. So, your first day on your job, they give you the forms, you got a 401k, you fill out the beneficiary designation, then you don't think about it ever again, right? But that beneficiary designation is going to control where that 401k account goes. So my older daughter, little mom brag here, she passed her CPA exam last year. She's working at a firm. And, one of the things they kind of give younger people to do do in the accounting firms is they have to go in and audit employee 401k plans, right? So that was her summer job, right? Or her summer work project. So she's like, I'm looking at these things and there's this form, like this spouse had to consent for the employee to take out a loan on her retirement account. That's her money. What do you mean that spouse had to, and I'm like, well, under the laws, the federal law that allow us to have retirement accounts, spouses are given rights, and you can't disinherit a spouse from your retirement account. They have to be the beneficiary unless the spouse signs a notarized consent form waiving that. So, those are some things that can be surprising, again, because my daughter, 24, this is what I mean, I'm a working mom, I'm a working person, this is my money. What do you mean my spouse would ever have a right to it? And you're like, well, that's what the law says. And that so again, there are some traps or things like that a 24-year-old, I don't think even the concept of a married couple, the traditional, she grew up in a kind of a non-traditional home. Obviously, my husband and I both work. So, the concept of the spouse who doesn't work and needing assets, that's, I think, what the motivation was behind that law, is that, if you were the working spouse, you couldn't just, disinherit, the spouse who stayed at home. So.
Wow. And then, also just talking about life insurance and thinking about if someone does pass away and they have a life insurance policy, having money right away to access while you're waiting for the death certificate, while you're trying to plan the funeral, all of those different things. I remember you actually telling me for my business accounts, because my businesses are owned by me solely, and I can't name Chris as an actual beneficiary. Right. Different type of process. But can you speak to that, and also speaking to personal accounts and making sure you have a beneficiary listed and how they can access the money?
Yeah. So with so kind of going back to, the way I would like to do a plan is I like to use that trust that I was talking about earlier, the revocable trust, as to be the owner of most of those assets, so that what happens is thinking of the trust, like a business, when you die, your successor trustee can come in and manage those assets that are in that trust. So that's the goal. But if you don't have a plan like that, those assets are going to be frozen until we get an executor qualified to then have the legal access to those assets. Now, life insurance, though, passes by beneficiary designation. So let's say your life insurance named Chris as the beneficiary. Chris could collect that policy and have immediate access to those funds. Or you could name your trust as a beneficiary, and your trustee would collect it and then have use of the money. So one of the things, though, kind of just dialing back a little bit when you mentioned life insurance, is I'm going to make a plug. I do not sell life insurance, especially for you young couples that are out there. I do see fewer couples buying life insurance now, and I don't know if they just don't think it's worth it. But these are the horror stories. I have had some situations that I've seen, where unfortunately a husband died early in his 30s, had just changed jobs.
Wow.
And was working like in an independent contractor job. A lot of people are doing that nowadays that didn't have benefits. He did not have insurance. And his wife had a 2-year-old and was pregnant with their second child at the time. And they did, thankfully that the community responded. There was a huge GoFundMe. This was a few years ago. I didn't even have a clue what GoFundMe was then. I'm like, what is this? But you don't want to be relying on GoFundMe to take care of your family, and life insurance, especially if you're young and you're in your 30s or whatever, it's cheap. Get term life insurance as much as you can. One of the mistakes I made when I was younger is, I just got it for like 20 years. I wish I had gotten it for like 30 years, because now that the kids are almost, I was just thinking, let me just get my youngest through college. It'd be nice to have had a little bit more for a longer period of time, because once you get kids to college, you still have, mortgage to pay and so forth. And, health issues, when you're 50s, things start popping up, that life insurance gets more expensive. So that's my plug on life insurance.
That honestly, that is such a great quick tip, is to get it. It is so inexpensive if you're young, and just do it. I mean, they came to our house and they basically did like a kind of a physical type. They asked a lot of questions, whatever it is, but it's so inexpensive. Just get it done.
Yeah. I was 26 years old when one of my best friends actually passed away. And that's when the light went off in my head. Like, oh my God, I need to get life insurance. At the time, me and my mom had a townhouse that we bought together as an investment property. And the thought of something happening to me and then my mom being strapped with that mortgage or anything like that, I was like, you know what? I need to get a life insurance policy and name some of my family members so that they're good if they're good financially if something happens to me. And I was 26 and my policy was like $5 a month. And I did a 40-year. So now I can, probably kick off some of my family members and put my kids on it. but yeah, it was so much cheaper back then. And then that you're good for that set amount of time and you just keep making payments. So the younger you are, I was telling people on our Wind Down Wednesday when this topic came up, I said, look, if you are 18, 19 years old and maybe you can't afford to pay the monthly, go to your parent and just say, hey, I want to be responsible and get this life insurance policy. God forbid something happens to me. But can you make the payment? Because it's going to go back to you if something happens to me anyway. Right. And then maybe once you get a little bit, into your career and you have the money, then you take the payments back over. But to have it at that young age, oh my goodness, yes.
A lot of people don't realize that, but it's so cheap. Then you wait to start doing it when you're like 55, 60, you're going to pay a whole lot of money.
Heck yeah.
I know, 55 sucks. But, one thing too is because I have college age kids, and thankfully we didn't have to do private loans. But with a lot of kids with private loans and, going to grad school, medical school, hundreds of $1,000s of debt, if I co-guaranteed a loan, let's say for a daughter to go to med school, the way I understand it, I mean, a lot of those loans are going to come looking for me for payment, if she passed away before, she could graduate and make the big bucks, right? And we could pay those loans off. So, again, that's just another thought of, how life insurance could be really beneficial to a family for younger people. Not only when you get married and have kids. So.
Awesome.
Isn't it a good way to beat taxes as well?
So, life insurance is not going to have to pay any income tax. Some states like Virginia, it's also creditor protected. Mm-hmm. So your creditors can't, so if you died and you didn't have enough assets to pay off your liabilities at death, that life insurance is protected. Mm-hmm. And it would also, again, at the point, I think it was Monique made about that it's ready cash. Again, you think about the death occurred, life is crazy, right? You don't know one end from the other. And but you do know if you send in that death certificate, you fill in that claim form, you should receive that cash usually in about 30 days. I mean, it's usually very quick. And so that peace of mind, I think is something that just can't be overlooked, because then you can figure out everything else out, right? You get the cash, get that life insurance, take a deep breath, and then start, working through, all the other issues.
Right. Now, it's so important because I remember so many times throughout the years, my family down south, somebody would pass away and then everybody had to sit around and raise money for the next 2 or 3 weeks and try to figure out the funeral service and everything. So it's definitely good to go ahead and prepare and have that stuff lined up.
Yeah.
Insurance policy.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Before we get out of here, I wanted to ask you, what are, now that we have all of this information, we have these documents, we have these policy numbers and all of that, what would you say is a great tip for keeping track of all of this in a place where, say for instance, if one of my beneficiaries is, my sister, what is the best way for me to get that information to her so that I may not want her to see it right now, but know where to go and get it.
Yes.
I'm not taking a shot at my sister.
No,
I'm just saying,
people
Well,
are,
but that's normal. I mean, it's a privacy. You don't really want to share everything right now. Yeah.
yeah, you better trust that sister. She might try to take you out early and get that money.
I don't want nobody seeing what's in the policy and then they put a hit out on me. But how can I gather this information, store it, and then if something happens, that person or persons, they know exactly who to call. They know the numbers. They know I need to go get this box that has all of this information, and I don't have to search around for it.
Yeah. I wish I had the magic answer for that. I tell the story of a client I had one time who told me every time she went away, she put her documents in her dryer. And I was like, okay. but I was like, well, I mean, that would not be my automatic place to go search for documents, but her kids knew. And so the message I take away from that was like, okay, wherever you decide is the best place is okay with me as long as it's reasonably safe. And the person who needs to go access those documents knows where they are. A lot of people nowadays are not using bank safe deposit box in terms of just physical storage of information because I think, they just don't want to deal with the inconvenience, that they'd rather have a safe in the house or some type of file box that has water, fire protection. So I think having documents physically printed out, okay, here, I know I'm going to sound very generational when I say this, but sometimes you just need to have the paper. So, having, documents saved electronically, but also printed out statements at least once a year, because what if they can't get into your laptop, right? If you're doing everything online, because you also need to have then that double safety measure of having the password somewhere that they can find and access that information. So, in our office, we also keep copies of, the legal documents. I will keep copies of, the financial information that clients provide me. So I think that's, another resource. I know it's not going to be as current and up to date because, I may not see you in a while, but at least that gives another kind of repository for safekeeping. And then, finding your own organizational system within your family. Are you someone that just wants to use like an Excel spreadsheet to list all your assets and track, as things change? That, again, I think it's more important that you're comfortable with whatever system you create and that your backup person, understands, what your system is, as opposed to any, any formalistic standard that I could, tell you to follow.
Yes. And my method of choice is a binder.
Yeah.
I believe in binders for everything. And I have a binder for every asset, like every category. So I have a binder for each home. I have a binder for, automobiles and jewelry and all of that. So, and it has a running list of everything that you need to know. It's very organized. It even has all, like for the homes, it has all of the, the utilities, who I'm paying, on average what the monthly bill is, the account number. Like we have all of that set so that if something happens, even like for me, if something happens to me, then, Chris needs to know how to get access to all of these different things. Other than that, he has Leaf, our house manager. So he'll be able to, have her look up things too. But just to have that information where it's printed out, I highly suggest it. Everybody needs to get a binder.
Yeah, I really believe in paper. And I know that, again, everybody's trying to be paperless. I'm sorry, Chris, I just spoke.
I was going to ask Monique if you have a binder for all of the hidden offshore accounts I got.
Well, actually, what I was going to tell you, Chris, and you guys I may have said this to you because, my jokes are pretty repetitive, but it's usually the spouse who has no clue what the financial assets are that is the surviving spouse. The spouse who dies first is usually the one who knows everything.
That is funny. Oh man.
It's not male, female. It's the spouse who knows all the financial information.
That is hilarious. But no, this was an amazing episode. I know we ran over time, but I thought it was necessary just to keep the conversation going. But some of my takeaways I recommend if people are going to have an estate planning attorney that they are going to see, I recommend scheduling that appointment close to the new year because it's easy to remember the last time you were there to see them. I kind of do the same thing even with my doctor appointments. I try to do everything around the new year. This way, if they're like, when was the last time you were here? Last year. This time. Like, keep track of it easier in your mind as you're busy from day to day. But the second would be get a binder, store that stuff, in a document where you can see it, where you can have it readily accessible.
You make me cry.
Yeah, and like have it together. Some other tips are, let's see. We said the ways to store everything. Allie, did you have any takeaways?
Just again, get that life insurance. And just have that face-to-face meeting. Don't just enter a will online. I highly encourage, because of, as we said, how emotional, uncomfortable, you kind of want some hand-holding there. You kind of want things explained so you really can take the emotions out of it and understand the best way to handle everything if, something was to happen.
Yes. And then having just like, if you have bank accounts, I highly recommend go to your bank and name someone as a beneficiary. It's really not that hard to do. So at least that's covered,
But do that and then meet with the lawyer and have the lawyer help you make sure it all works together. And that's, as far as lawyers go, I do encourage you to look for lawyers that this is what they do. The attorneys who really spend the time drafting these documents, attorneys who do it kind of on the side, they're not going to have necessarily the experience to really give you the depth of representation that you might need. So
yes, yeah, no, I totally agree with that. Having people that are in the field, because you just want to make sure that they know the laws, they know when they're changing. I'm sure you spend a lot of time having to learn whatever was updated, and know
always changing. People think it doesn't change, but there's always a little, things that are moving and tweaking. So,
Yes. Yeah. Because I remember there was something about a limit that you explained to us had changed. And you were like, I might want to come in and change some of these numbers around because this changed or that changed. I can't remember what it was exactly, but that's another example. It's like, we had no idea. You were looking out for us and said, oh, so it's great. I definitely recommend if you can afford it, get an attorney. Like, there's no sense in you reinventing the wheel. Get someone who knows the information, they have the knowledge, and they're able to give you some sound advice based on your situation, because we're all different. We're very unique. And I think that's the best way to go. So thank you so much, Martha.
Good to see you guys.
Yes.
Nice to meet you.
Thank
Nice
you.
to meet you.
Awesome. So thank y'all for listening. Listen to this episode again and take notes. Seriously, because this is a whole wealth of information that you just got for free. So thank y'all so much for listening to our episode. We're going to continue on doing these generational wealth type of episodes and have some more information for you as we're trying to get our money together in this new year. And also make sure y'all visit our store at notforlazymoms.com, shop away so that I can, pay off some of these bills. And next week, we will see you soon, and take care.